I'd like to talk to you about campaign finance reform. 3 powerful words that have the power to do this to a room full of people. What I want to do is give you an example about how this problem really affects you and me and everyone in this country personally. This is a problem about corruption, but it's not the Governor Blagojevich kind of corruption where he's selling a vacant Senate seat for millions of dollars. That is illegal corruption. That's illegal corruption. I want to talk about legal corruption. It's legal corruption because the Supreme Court has made it legal. It used to be illegal, and now it's legal. It's a corruption of the entire system. This example I'm going to give you is about the pharmaceutical industry, but make no mistake, this kind of thing happens all the time. It's just one example. It's the same if we were talking about Wall Street or the petroleum industry or insurance or communications or any of the other sectors and corporations that set up big lobbying operations in Washington, D.C. So the example starts here. Welcome to Canada. Well, you might remember 10 or 15 years ago, we were treated to the sight of senior citizens getting on buses and going to Canada to buy their prescription medications. They had to go to a foreign country because in Canada, prescription drugs, even though they were made in the same factory, the same exact brand, the drugs were cheaper. And so the prospect of senior citizens having to go to another country to get a necessity of life like prescription drugs was embarrassing to a lot of politicians. They decided to do something about it. And here's what they did. They passed Medicare Part D. This is the prescription drug benefit. I'm sure you're familiar with it. During the time that Part D was under consideration in Congress, pharma, this is the lobbying arm of the pharmaceutical industry, pharma had 824 lobbyists on Capitol Hill. Well, you know, there are 535 members of Congress. That's between the House and the Senate. So that adds up to about 1.5 lobbyists for every single member of Congress. Pharma spent a total of $239 million on lobbying expenses. Well, now, some of that money went for the salaries that got paid to those 824 lobbyists, but a whole lot of that money went to other forms of lobbying. You might just think of it as schmoozing. Now, what I mean by that is that lobbyists love to invite politicians out. They invite them out on golf outings, sometimes on private jets. They take them to like football games, to the Super Bowl, where they treat them to their luxury skyboxes. The reason that lobbyists like to take politicians out on trips like that is because if you go to a football game or a golf outing, you've got 3 or 4 hours of that politician's time, undivided attention. In other words, what that money is buying is access. Access granted. Pharma paid out $87 million in direct campaign contributions during the 2-year cycle that Part D was under consideration. So they spent a total of $326 million lobbying on Medicare Part D. You're probably wondering, well, what did they get for it? What did they expect to get? Well, here's what they got. What they got is a law. And this law says that Medicare, a branch of government or an agency of government, may not use its vast purchasing power in a free market to get a better price from the drug companies. Or let me put it a different way. Congress ordered Medicare not to use its negotiating power to get a better price for the medications. And everybody on Capitol Hill knew that that was going to cost more money. It was going to cost more money. We know exactly how much it cost. And the reason we can tell is that the Veterans Administration also buys a lot of pharmaceuticals. The difference is the VA can negotiate. The VA was formed back in the 1930s, before the era of big money, and they're allowed to negotiate prices. And so let's just say that this is a cholesterol pill, something that a person would take every day. Every time the VA buys that pill, and it's the same pill made in the same factory, the VA pays 54 cents. Medicare has to pay $1. And that's just because Medicare can't negotiate. So it adds up, as you might expect. The Congressional Budget Office calculates that it costs us $11.2 billion overpayments by the taxpayers to the pharmaceutical industry. That's $11.2 billion every year And it's based on a one-time investment of $326 million. So ask this, if that $11.2 billion bonus is not because of the $326 million that pharma paid to Congress during the course of getting that law passed, what can possibly explain it? Is it insanity? Well, maybe it's crazy like a fox, but no, it's not insanity. It's the money. It's the money. Now, there's another side to this big money problem, and I'm going to stick with Medicare Part D for the example of that. Here is the revolving door. Okay, you've heard about this. This is where members of Congress come into Congress and they stay a few years, they make contacts, they gain influence, they gain clout, and then they take their experience and their influence and their clout out into the private sector, maybe to Wall Street or maybe to K Street where the lobbying firms are. And as I say, I'll stick with Medicare Part D because here's the example. This is Billy Tauzin. Now, Billy Tauzin was a very powerful member of Congress at the time that Part D was under negotiation. And Billy Tauzin is given credit with doing the arm twisting and the schmoozing and the cajoling that was necessary to get that non-negotiate clause put in there. As I say, everybody in Congress knew that that was going to cost the government, cost the taxpayers more money. I can't tell you exactly what Billy Tauzin was thinking, but here's what he did next. This is Billy Tauzin again, over on the right. Only this is 3 months after Part D was signed into law. Billy Tauzin has left Congress, and now he's the president of pharma. He's the president of the very industry group that he got this enormous taxpayer benefit for. And they're paying him $2 million a year to start. Okay? In Washington, that happens so often that they got a pet phrase for it. They call it monetizing your government service. Well, monetizing means a lot of money. No matter what rank you have, no matter what role you play in government, you could be a staff member on Capitol Hill, or you could be a member of a regulatory agency, or a member of Congress. You're going to make about 10 times more if you go into lobbying. About 10 times more. And so it's so lucrative that congressional members do it more and more. And right now, 2014, 42% of former House members are active lobbyists. In the Senate, it's 50%. And the reason I can stand here and tell you that that's because of the big money in Congress is because before this wave of big money that was unleashed by the Supreme Court, in 1970, only 3% of former members of Congress became lobbyists, only 3%. So what does this word monetize mean to us? What does it mean to the people? Well, it means this. It means that during the years that they're still in Congress, that they're still serving in Congress, but they're thinking about becoming lobbyists, ask yourself, are these members of Congress thinking about we the people? Are they thinking about what's best for us? Or are they thinking, well, you know, that lobbying pays a lot of money and it would set me up for life, it'd be my retirement, I'd get my kids through college, so I better not displease, I better keep them happy. I better keep the people that are going to hire me as a well-paid lobbyist happy. And so just subconsciously, are they thinking about us, we the people, or are they thinking corporations first? Ask yourself. And is this what the founders of the United States intended? No. And I can even say hell no. And the reason I can say that is because at the time they wrote the Constitution, the founders also wrote the Federalist Papers. And the Federalist Papers explained what they intended, what they meant when they wrote the Constitution. James Madison wrote Federalist Paper number 52. And in Federalist 52, he says the House of Representatives ought to be that one branch of government that is dependent on the people alone. In other words, no divided loyalties. Depend on we the people that vote for them, instead of someone who funds their elections or hires them as a lobbyist. So why do we allow so much big money in Washington? Well, you and I didn't vote for it. And you know what? Congress didn't even vote for it. The Supreme Court voted for it. It was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court over the years, starting in 1976, has made fundamental changes in the way that we understand the Constitution and the way that the rules can be applied. Now, there are three basic cases. There are a handful of others, but there are three big landmark cases, I'll call them. There's Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976. That was when Warren Burger was Chief Justice. There's Citizens United that you've heard about, 2010. And then this year, 2014, McCutcheon versus the FEC. And here's what those cases have done. I'll start with Buckley versus Vallejo. First, in Buckley, they held that there could be no limit on how much someone can spend running for Congress. I'll show you the effect of that in a second. They also decided, this is the first case where they actually said, money has the same protections as free speech under the Constitution. Well, net effect is this. In 1976, if you wanted to run for Congress and you wanted to win a seat, and this is in today's dollars, we're talking about inflation-adjusted dollars, it would cost you about $150,000 in 2012 dollars to run for Congress. But look, just about every election cycle after Buckley versus Vallejo, it went up and up and up because there's no limit on how much you can spend. Therefore, you've got to raise more to have more than your opponent so you can win. By 2010, it was up to $1.2 million on average. And then that's when Citizens United was decided. In just 2 years after Citizens United, went up another $500,000 to 1.7. Let me break it down a different way. In 1976, if you wanted to win a seat in Congress, you had to raise about $226 every day. Now, an ordinary person could do that through honest fundraising techniques. You could have bake sales and dinners, fundraising dinners. And so $226 a day. By 2012, it was up to $2,328 every day of the year. That's weekends and holidays. And even the day after you get reelected, you got to go out and raise it again. They can't raise that from ordinary people. We just don't have that kind of money. So back to the cases. Here's Citizens United. And as you've heard, Citizens United found that corporations and other groups have the same rights as people when it comes to campaign finance. Corporations and ultra-wealthy people have the same right that you and I have to contribute unlimited money. Or put it the other way, I've got the same right to contribute unlimited money as someone with $1 billion. Think about what that means. What kind of a right is that where I'm concerned? But here's the scary part, is that increasingly, because of the way these super PACs are organized, it's dark money. It's dark money, and I chose those colors so it looks scary, because it is. We don't know where that money came from. A lot of it didn't even come from the United States. There are people out there that want to move jobs away from the United States. They're allowed to contribute to our political system. They're allowed to influence our elections because of Citizens United. Citizens United was just a big money bomb that went off in our political system, and the graph looks like this. In the decades before Citizens United, there's almost no independent money, almost no dark expenditure in our political system. But 2010, Citizens United gets decided, it goes through the roof. And that line is not flattening out, it's just going up and up and up. And then we've got McCutcheon, 2014. And what that did is it eliminated the aggregate limits on direct campaign contributions. And that's just going to blow the cost of running for Congress through the roof even further. So welcome to 2014. There are effectively no limits on money in politics. Here is something I find fascinating, because it's actually fascinating because I think he's telling the truth about his own beliefs. This is Chief Justice John Roberts. This is his majority opinion, part of his opinion in the McCutcheon decision. And he frankly admits that money buys access and influence. And by admitting that, he's acknowledging that more money buys more access, more influence. But then he says this, he says, influence or access to elected officials doesn't mean that those officials are corrupt. And then he says this, he says the appearance of influence or access, in other words, the fact that it appears that ultra-wealthy people and corporations have more influence and access to our politicians, isn't going to shake our faith in democracy. I think John Roberts actually believes that. And he wrote it in his opinion. It's there for the whole world to see. So the Supreme Court has effectively said that money has the same rights as the citizen. They've said that corporations have the same rights as the citizen. 9 times out of 10 in our system, the candidate with more money wins the election. And it's not hard to see why. If you got the bigger sound system, you can just drown out your opposition. Just drown them out. So Congress has become more and more dependent on the big money. And that affects their thinking. I mean, if you think about it, you got to raise that kind of money every single day. And they do spend between 30 and 70% of their time raising money, maybe except for the ultra wealthy members of Congress who already can self-finance. But the rest of them have to raise this money. And it affects their thinking because they start thinking, where can I get more? And where can I get more? I need more money, more money, more money. Pretty soon, they're thinking about what the people who pay for the elections need instead of thinking about we the people. They depend on the financiers instead of the voters. And that means that a system error has occurred. But this time, the error is not in your computer. It's in our Constitution. It's in the document that starts out, we the people. So, it's caused by the Supreme Court. It's caused by primarily these 3 decisions of the Supreme Court. And what we need to do, see, we can fix this. I'm sorry that my talk has been so much gloom and doom, but we can fix this. We just have to reverse those decisions. And even though you and I don't have votes on the Supreme Court, we have votes, and we can reverse those decisions. What we need is a constitutional amendment. We need an amendment that provides for separation of big money from the government. Now, the founders gave us ways to amend the Constitution. There are basically 2 ways to do it. The first way starts with Congress. Okay, if 2/3 of both houses of Congress can agree on the exact wording of an amendment, then that goes out to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it, the state legislatures. And if 3/4 ratify, then we've got an amendment. But when was the last time that 2/3 of Congress agreed on anything important? 16 states have gone on record officially asking Congress to pass this amendment to overturn Citizens United. 0 progress, nothing to show for it. It's been 4 years since Citizens United. 500 cities and local governments are on record. Please, Congress, overturn Citizens United. 0 progress. Citizens, through election results and polls, between 75% and 90% of Americans think that big money is too influential in our political system. And what's Congress's reaction? It's just a shrug of the shoulders, I don't think that they think there's as a group, of course there's some people in Congress that want the system changed, but as a group, I think that the members of Congress are thinking, well, what's wrong with this system? I mean, I got elected, didn't I? What could possibly be wrong? So Congress is not the way to get this amendment. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to vote to cut off their money supply. But here's the good news. Okay, there is a second way to amend the Constitution. We can skip Congress. This is called the Article 5 Convention approach. It allows us to skip Congress and initiate the amendment through the states. The state legislatures can start it. The founders made sure we had a way to do that because they knew that sometimes Congress would be the problem that needed a constitutional amendment, and that day has come. Step 1, 3/4 of the states, that's 34 states, 2/3 of the states, 34 states have to call for a convention. It's a simple resolution. Step 2, the convention is held. Okay, now about this convention, it's under the control of the states. The states decide who the delegates are that attend the convention. And the convention can only propose an amendment. It can't change the Constitution because that's step 3. Step 3 is ratification. And it takes 38 states, that's 3/4 of the states, to ratify any proposed constitutional amendment. People ask this question, what are the chances that this convention would propose a crazy amendment? Well, I think they're virtually nil. And all you need to remember 3 numbers, 13, 27, and 18. And here's how they fit. Okay? Remember, it takes 38 states to ratify anything that the convention proposes. That means that any 13 states can block an amendment. Any 13 states. Okay? Well, right now, in today's world, we got 27 what I'll call double red states. Those are states where both houses of the state legislature are controlled by Republicans. And we got 18 double blue states controlled by Democrats. Remember, 13 states can block it. So only the most broadly popular, nonpartisan proposed amendment is going to have a chance to pass through 38 states. So we don't really need to worry about anything crazy getting put into the Constitution through this method. Overturning Citizens United has the kind of popular support I'm talking about. Between 75 and 90% of Americans want the big money influence out. So we need this convention of the states to write our amendment to get our republic back. Because right now, our republic, this is our representative democracy. Our republic is lost. And I borrowed this picture. This is a book cover, a book by Harvard professor Lawrence Lessig called Republic Lost. And I love this illustration because what he's showing is that Congress is barricaded behind a wall of money. That's why things aren't getting done. Or maybe he's saying Congress is shrink-wrapped in money. I'm not quite sure. Either way, we can restore our republic. We can have our government back. We can have our congressional reps back on our side if we just strip that money away. You might remember the story about Ben Franklin. He was leaving Constitution Hall in Philadelphia. It was the end of the convention, a long hot summer of 1787. He was old and frail. And a woman approached him on the street and she said, "Dr. Franklin, what have you brought us? Is it a monarchy?" Because people in those days were worried about a monarchy getting established. And he said, "It's a republic, madam, if you can keep it." Because the founders knew that this republic wasn't going to take care of itself forever. It was going to be up to the people to keep taking care of it. We had to maintain it. And they gave us the tools to do it, to preserve our republic, our representative democracy. They gave us this break glass in case of emergency kind of tool. We need to use it now. It's the amendment process under Article 5, and it's the amendment process through the convention.